For this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about the causes of the Great Depression and the lead up to World War II. So, as we sort of have discussed in the class previously, after World War I, there was a time of boom in the United States, in Europe, and around the world. There was a surge in the amount of consumer products that people were able to purchase. For most people, they were making more than they previously had been, and there seemed to be this overall sense of excitement for what world history had in store. Now, with that, of course, we also know that that boom period couldn't last forever, and eventually the bubble did burst. With that, we can, of course, talk about the causes of the Great Depression. Now, with the Great Depression, we're going to talk about this in the sense of the United States, where we can sort of see the idea of the stock market crash of Black Thursday. But of course, we'll also talk about the worldwide ramifications as well. As far as the causes of the Depression, some of the ones that are very important would be the consumer reliance of credit. With that, people are using credit to purchase things that they are not able to pay off easily, and there would be a high interest rate for crediting companies. They're also not scanning people the way they might now. So, for example, if you went to apply for a credit card, they're going to run a credit check to see if you're going to be able to qualify. That's not something that they had for most companies at this point. We can also see, of course, the stock market crash is going to be huge when the stock market crash takes place. It's going to happen because there's a lot of speculation on the market. Around 9 million Americans are going to be playing the stock market. That is going to be a substantial number, and what they're doing is they're buying on the margin, and that might work well when there is a bull market or an upward trend in stock prices. However, since people are using loans to purchase stocks, buying on this margin means that if they are able to turn a profit, they can pay those loans off and also make more money that they can then reinvest into the stock market. But if something were to happen, so for example, say there were to be a period where there was a bear market or a downward trend in stock prices, then that means that a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money very quickly. So on October 24th, 1929, also referred to as Black Thursday, we can see that the stock market crashed. This is going to be terrible. People have borrowed on the money that they're using to invest in the stock market, which means that they will not be able to repay those loans. It's going to start a banking crisis. So, for example, what I have here, this is crowds outside of the stock market exchange on Black Tuesday. But with that, we can also see that they are going to start running the banks. They're going to storm those to try and get their money back as well. Some other things that take place very quickly after the start of the Depression, you will see business failures will soar. So up here I have a chart that shows you what business failures in the United States looked like from 1929 to 1933. Businesses are not able to borrow money from banks, and many are going to have to close their factories. Many other types of businesses will also have to fire workers in order to try and save money to stay in business, and businesses have to cut production in some cases to save money. In addition to that, we can see that because of these closures, unemployment will also rise. In 1929, around 1.5 million Americans were unemployed, and by the time you get to 1933, over the course of the Depression, around 25 million Americans will be unemployed. With these numbers, I think it's also important to keep in mind that some of the groups that are hit the hardest are going to be the African American community as well as the immigrant community. So in both of those communities, they are going to be the first who are going to be laid off, and they are going to be the ones that are less likely to find new opportunities. Many women who were working were also laid off, and instead it was encouraged that their husbands would have worked to support the family. However, of course, there are cases where women would need to work, and when a household loses that income, it's going to be very devastating for that as well. In fact, we can see that in 1929, most families really do depend on the labor of all members of the family in some way. In 1929, only around 80% of the nation's families 80% of the nation's families did not have any savings at all. These families didn't have any sort of cushion to help soften the blow of the Depression. For the United States, another interesting thing to keep in mind is that for President Herbert Hoover in 1929, he really sort of put forward this idea of rugged individualism. It actually came from a campaign speech in 1928. And with this rugged individualism, you can remember it kind of as this sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of mentality. The idea with rugged individualism was that you were supposed to just work harder, just do better, do more. If what you're doing is not working, try something else. And in the past, that technically had been the response of many other presidents to economic depressions as well as economic panics that had taken place. This wasn't the first one that had ever happened. However, it was the biggest one that had ever happened, and it wasn't enough to just try harder. Another issue that, of course, the United States is facing is that in the past, charities had actually been responsible for helping to bring people out of tough situations. So if a family had lost their income, they would be able to go to various charities in their hometown. That charity would help them, give them a couple of weeks worth of food or a place to stay, and then eventually they would be able to get back on their feet and they would be able to provide for themselves again. However, there's not enough charity to go around, and the government is not doing anything to help and not giving the assistance that people need. This also plays back into World War I in a way, because we can see that for Hoover, he has to face down what is known as the Bonus Army. Now, for the Bonus Army, this is a group of people who wanted to have their bonus paid. It was said that the World War I citizens who had served during the war, they were scheduled to receive a $1,000 bonus for their service in 1945. And $1,000 might not sound much, but we have to keep in mind with inflation, it would be much more significant if it was the same amount today. And so with that bonus, many people are saying we don't need it in 1945. And in fact, you can see on several of their signs it says, we need our cash now, not for our tombstone. But when they decide to march on Washington, they do so, and you're going to see that thousands of World War I veterans come. And the picture I have up here, you can see New Mexico, North Carolina, Georgia. So people coming from all throughout the United States begging to have their pensions paid now instead of later. You can also see, of course, there's more foreclosures. And then I have a small picture up here. This is going to be a picture of what a Hooverville would have looked like. And these Hoovervilles are basically shanty towns that are thrown together on the outskirts of large cities by those who are unemployed. And it's just their way of trying to find some sort of shelter and some semblance of living in a community over the course of the early Depression. Now, again, this has a huge impact worldwide as well. If you keep in mind the Dawes Plan, that was a plan after World War I, where the United States, over the course of the 1920s, U.S. investors were going to use private loans to give to the Germans so that they could help pay their war reparations, again, like $56 million in their money, to Great Britain and France. And then from there, Great Britain and France would turn around and pay their Allied war debts to the United States Treasury, which in turn would help to stimulate the economy. And eventually these loans would be paid off, which would help the U.S. investors to further profit from the system. But with the stock market crash, that will also come to an end. And so with that, eventually for the United States, we will see that Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Eleanor Roosevelt will come into the White House as the president and the first lady. For the Roosevelt administration, they put forward what is known as the New Deal. With the New Deal, they are going to have 3 different types of programs. We're not going to go over all of them in this short video, but it is important to know what types of programs they were. So the first type you have is going to be relief. This is going to be designed to aid needy Americans in the short term. You're going to have recovery, which is designed to revive the economy, and reform, which should help to eliminate the abuses and help to prevent future depressions. Now, for Europe, in this lead up to World War II, we can also see that they are going to face many issues as well. We can see that only the United States and Japan were technically better off after World War I, at least for a period of time. And of course, the Depression is going to make the situation in Europe even worse. We can see that in Europe, people are suffering. There's a lot of debt from these governments. France is still trying to figure out what form of government it would like to have. In fact, between 1919 and 1939, France has 40 different government changes. And people in Europe just overall are feeling strain, and they're ready for a sense of change. And in fact, one of the greatest places we can probably see that is going to be with the economic problems that are taking place in Germany. So in Germany, we can see that the Weimar Republic, as it's formed, we can see that Germany owes more than $33 billion in today's money in reparations and in loans for World War I. And to pay it, Germany didn't end up actually raising taxes, but instead they're relying on loans from other nations. And they also just started to print more money. This was a huge mistake. It causes rampant inflation. It's called hyperinflation, which is going to be the extreme devaluation of their money. And to give you an example of how this looks, it's not inflation in the sense of you went to the grocery store last week and something cost $2.99 and this week it cost $3.01. Instead, what we're thinking about is that in 1918, a loaf of bread cost 1 German mark. In 1922, a loaf of bread cost 160 German marks. That's 160 times more than it had previously cost. And in 1923, we can see that that same loaf of bread, just 1 year after it cost 160 marks, would then cost 200 billion marks. So the picture I have up here, you can see this is a housewife. She's actually burning the marks because it was actually better for them to burn them as a fuel source. It was actually cheaper to do that than it was to buy firewood. And so because of that, we can see that Germany is really not doing well in these interwar years. As far as how this leads into World War II, we can see that leaders like Adolf Hitler from Germany, they are going to feed on people's insecurities and their desire for change. And they do so by, of course, trying to put forward these ideas that there are certain groups of people that are responsible for their problems, putting forward ideas of extreme nationalism and pride, and creating effectively totalitarian regimes where they are going to really encourage people to maybe act in ways they previously had not, but with the promise that they would have more money. So in the next video, we'll talk a little bit about World War II. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.